On my birthday, they forgot I lived in the house. No message, no knock on the door, no half-hearted cake or reheated dinner. I only realized what day it was when I checked the calendar, not because I expected celebration, but because something felt especially quiet. And in this house, silence isn't peace, it's absence. That evening, I walked into the kitchen. They were already eating, laughing, passing plates, talking over each other. My daughter was showing pictures from her recent trip. My son-in-law had just told a joke I didn't catch. Everyone was there, except me. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, watching. No one looked up. Not because they were angry, not because I had done something wrong, but because I'd become furniture. Eventually, I sat down at the corner of the table, the place no one ever claimed. My chair didn't scrape loudly, my plate didn't clatter. I poured myself a glass of water and waited. Then my daughter looked over, mid-laugh, and said, "Oh, you're home. I didn't hear you come in." I nodded, smiled a little. "Long day," I said. She turned back to the conversation. No one asked what I meant. No one asked what I did. No one asked how I was. The only one who made room for me was the empty seat next to mine. I used to be at the head of this table. I built this house, not just with money, but with hands. I sanded the wood of that very chair. I painted the walls, laid the floor, installed the kitchen cabinets after long shifts when my back felt like it would snap. I held my kids on my lap while their soup cooled. I kissed my wife's hand across this table. Now I can't even get eye contact. There's a cruelty in being ignored that's sharper than anger. At least when someone is angry with you, they still believe you matter enough to feel something. But this apathy, it's like being erased in real time. They talk around me, not to me. They ask each other for salt, for seconds, for stories, but never ask me to share mine. When I speak, there's always a delay, a beat too long before they respond, a glance at their phone, a fork raised halfway. It's not hostility, it's worse. It's the kind of politeness that's used to push you out gently. So gently you almost believe you walked away on your own. I remember when my voice filled this house, when I read bedtime stories in silly voices, when my daughter asked me to explain the stars, when my son waited for me to come home just to tell me about a drawing he made at school. Back then, I mattered because they needed me. Now they're grown, and I've become background noise. I tried to tell myself this was part of life, that parents fade into quiet corners so their children can grow into the center. But something about that night, my birthday, settled differently in my chest, because I realized something terrifying. It wasn't that they didn't know it was my birthday. It's that they didn't even notice I hadn't spoken all evening, not one word. They had built a life right over me, like a tree growing through an old foundation, and I was still standing beneath it, wondering when the shade became a shadow. When dinner ended, they moved to the living room without me. I stayed behind and cleared the dishes no one saw me use. The faucet hummed, the plates clinked, the room echoed with everything I never said. And for the first time I thought, what would happen if I just left? Not loudly, not dramatically, just disappeared. Would they notice in the morning? Would they pause at the table and ask where I'd gone? Would they miss my silence? Or would my chair simply stay empty, and no one ask why it was never filled again? The hallway knows more about me than anyone in this house. It hears my footsteps every night. Slow, deliberate, quiet. It listens as I enter, unnoticed, and leave again without a sound. The walls have memorized my rhythm, the soft scuff of my shoes, the pause before my door opens. The hallway has become my witness, the only one. No one asks what time I get home. No one wonders where I go. Sometimes I imagine staying outside for hours just to see how long it would take before someone texted, "Are you okay?" But I already know the answer. They'd just assume I was in my room, or forget I was gone at all. Every evening I walk past laughter, not mine. The living room glows with light and movement, the sound of a sitcom, someone FaceTiming a friend, video clips passed around between them like candy. Plates clatter, doors open and close, lives unfold, and I pass through it all, like a shadow no one tries to touch. They see me, technically, eyes make contact, but that's not the same as being seen. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the kitchen and just listen. They talk about their day, traffic, coworkers, some drama in a group chat. My name doesn't come up. Not once. Not even in passing. It's as if their lives are happening on a stage I helped build, and I've been quietly ushered backstage. The curtain fell, and no one looked back to see if I was still there. When I was younger, when they were younger, the sound of the front door opening was a celebration. I'd hear tiny footsteps running toward me, arms flying into my chest, voices overlapping. Guess what happened today? Dad, I got a sticker. Can we have pancakes for dinner? Now the door opens and nothing changes. No one looks up from their screens. No one asks if I ate. The air doesn't shift. The house doesn't even flinch. I pass through, place my keys on the same hook, hang my jacket, and walk to my room. The hallway always greets me. The creak of the third floorboard, the draft that slips beneath the door. It welcomes me like an old friend that remembers what the rest of the world has chosen to forget. Sometimes I try to speak. A comment, a question, a joke I overheard at work. It's always met with that distracted nod. Or worse, that pause followed by the words, "Sorry, what did you say?" I repeat myself. They laugh politely. Then the moment disappears like I was never part of it. And so I stop trying. Now I just walk the hallway. A quiet procession of routines. Dinner alone. TV in my room. Lights off before anyone notices I was ever awake. Some nights I open the door just a little. Peer out into the hallway like a man standing on a pier, watching a party on a distant boat. I see the flicker of light from the living room. I hear their voices. They are close, but they are not with me. It's strange how loneliness can exist in a house full of people. You begin to feel like an echo, something that was once a voice, once a sound. No, just a trace. The hallway knows me, and that's both a comfort and a wound, because when the only thing that notices you is the floor that creaks beneath your steps, you begin to wonder if you've already left and no one even realized you were still here. Friends, let me take a short pause. Please share in the comments. Where are you listening from? Has anything like this ever happened in your life? Maybe you felt invisible too, even among those closest to you. If this story touches something in you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. That's how you help us grow this channel and keep telling stories that matter. Now, let's continue. It happened by accident. I had borrowed my son's tablet to help fix a setting. Nothing dramatic, just a forgotten password he couldn't reset. He handed it over with a distracted, "Yeah, sure, it's somewhere in the settings." I sat at the kitchen table, slowly navigating the menus, and that's when it happened. A message banner slid down from the top of the screen. "Let's not mention it to Dad. He'll just make it awkward." I froze. The message came from my daughter. It was part of a group thread titled simply, "Us." I tapped it, not to spy, just to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. But I hadn't. It was all there. Dozens, hundreds of messages, photos, links, weekend plans, dinners I didn't know they had, vacations they'd taken together, jokes, memes, screenshots of conversations, sometimes with me, sometimes about me. One thread ran, "Can someone remind Dad not to wear that jacket again when we go out? It's kind of embarrassing. I know I tried telling him last time. He just doesn't get it." Another, "Let's have a Sunday dinner. Just us. He'll understand." And then buried further down, "I think he's lonely. But what are we supposed to do? Pretend we're still 12? He's just not on our level anymore. That's not our fault." Not on their level. Not included. Not even considered. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a forgotten invitation. It was a decision. They had built a version of the family that no longer included me. And it wasn't cruel. That was the hardest part. It wasn't hostile. It was practical, comfortable, clean. I was the leftover thread that didn't match the new pattern. So they snipped me out, politely. I sat there with the screen in my hands, and something inside me hollowed. It was a feeling not of rage, not even of sadness, but of smallness. The kind you feel when you see your own name in a list of people who once called you hero. Now discussed like a misunderstanding, an inconvenience, a relic. I closed the app, reset the settings, handed the tablet back. They never knew I saw it, and I never told them. What could I say? That I knew? That I saw the blueprint of a world they'd built behind a digital curtain. One where I wasn't invited. They would deny it, maybe. Or worse, they would say it wasn't personal. That would cut deeper, because it was personal. It was me. Me, and my slow pace, my outdated jokes, my quiet presence, my rougher edges. They had grown past needing me, past depending on me. But instead of walking beside me, they had quietly chosen to walk around me. I sat in my room that night and looked around. The framed photos, the little crafts they'd made for me years ago, the birthday cards I'd kept, each one signed in crayon. To the best dad in the world. I love you forever. Thank you for everything. I wondered when forever ended. What day it became until you're no longer relevant. A family chat without me. Not by accident. Not by error. But by design. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to admit. You don't have to leave a house to be gone from it. Sometimes they move on while you're still standing in the hallway. And by the time you notice the doors close behind you, you've already been gone. For years, the day began like any other. Quiet, unremarkable, slow. There was no stream of morning messages, no laughter through the hallway, no one knocking on the door with a "Happy birthday, old man," and a crooked smile. I told myself not to expect anything. I had trained myself, year after year, to lower the bar a little more. But deep down, in the soft, stubborn part of the heart, hope doesn't always listen to reason. By noon, I'd made myself tea. It had gone cold by the time I realized I hadn't taken a sip. It just sat there on the table, wisps of warmth trailing upward and disappearing, the way people do when you forget to notice they're still around. I checked my phone. Nothing. No calls. No messages. Not even a calendar notification from someone else's phone reminding them to remember me. I sat in the same chair I had eaten breakfast in, staring out the window. It wasn't raining, but it wasn't sunny either. One of those dull days, not dark enough to feel dramatic, but dim enough to echo something inside you. I thought about the cakes I used to make for them, lopsided, a little burnt sometimes, too much icing because they liked it sweet. I remember their little hands grabbing fistfuls before I could even cut it. I remember singing louder than everyone else, holding the candles just a little longer so they could wish harder. One year, my daughter wanted a unicorn cake. I had no idea how to make one, but I stayed up until 2 a.m., carving the shape out of layers of sponge and covering it with candy she loved. The horn was a rolled ice cream cone wrapped in tinfoil. She squealed so loud she cried. Another year, my son wanted a volcano cake. It collapsed halfway through baking. I built it again from scratch. When the chocolate lava poured from the center, his face lit up like I'd summoned real magic. I gave them those moments, without question, without needing anything in return. But today was quiet. The kettle clicked off again. I hadn't realized I'd boiled the water twice. The steam had long vanished. No footsteps down the hall. No one peeking in to ask if I had plans. No, hey, want to do something later? Just the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of laughter from another room, not directed at me. Not because of me. At one point, I opened the fridge. I had bought a small cake for myself the day before, just in case. Not out of bitterness, but to mark the day. To say, you are still here. You still count. It was plain, chocolate, one candle. I set it on the table, lit the candle, and sat back. The flame flickered in the stillness, reflected in the window like a signal to no one. I didn't make a wish, because wishes are for those who believe someone is still listening. Instead, I watched the candle burn until it melted down the side. Then I blew it out, not with ceremony, but with silence. Some birthdays are loud, full of songs and wrapping paper and hands tugging at sleeves. And some are like this. A man sitting alone at the table he once filled with joy, now surrounded by memories louder than voices. They didn't forget because they were cruel. They forgot because I had become forgettable. And there's a kind of heartbreak in that no candle can warm, no cake can sweeten. It's not just that they forgot the date, it's that they forgot who I still am. My room is at the end of the hallway, the one with the door always half closed, the light seeping out from beneath only late at night. No one knocks. No one checks in. It's not because they're giving me space. It's because they've forgotten I'm inside. I live in this house, but not in the way they do. They move through it with voices, with presence, with touch. Shoes kicked off in the entryway, jackets dropped over chairs, music spilling from rooms like laughter that doesn't need permission. And me? I pass like a guest, like a man staying too long in a place that once was his. A quiet occupant of a room that has slowly become invisible. They never enter it, not because it's forbidden, but because it no longer crosses their mind to care what's behind that door. Once this room was full of their drawings, pictures taped to the walls, world's best dad signs written in marker, broken crayons scattered across the carpet. I kept every one. Some are still in the drawer beside my bed, curled and fading. I don't look at them often, not because they hurt, but because they remind me of a version of love that used to be effortless. Now the room is clean, tidy, empty in all the wrong ways. It holds everything I don't say. It hears every sigh I swallow. It contains the man I've become, the man they no longer ask about. They walk past my door like it's just a wall, as if nothing lives on the other side. They knock on each other's doors. They text before dinner. They send links to shows, to articles, to jokes that don't include me. But me! I hear the thud of their steps beyond the hallway, their laughter bouncing off the walls, fading just before it reaches mine. Once when I was sick, I waited. Not for medicine, not even for soup. Just for someone to ask how I felt. But no one came. It's not malice. It's forgetfulness. A slow, quiet erasure. There's a coat still hanging behind my door, the one I used to wear when I walked them to school. Rain or cold, I was there. Now it gathers dust. No one remembers the smell of it, the warmth, the safety. Sometimes I wonder if I died in here, how long it would take before they noticed. Would they knock? Would they call my name through the door? Or just assume I'd gone out? Would the hallway stay quiet until someone needed to store something and realized the room had never been empty? Just ignored? That's what I've become. A man not feared, not hated, just unvisited. And that's its own kind of death. To live where no one enters. To exist where no one wonders. My room is warm. It smells of books and old clothes and evenings spent trying not to be lonely. It is not unhappy. But it is silent. Too silent. Not with peace, but with the ache of being forgotten. In the one place you were supposed to belong. I used to believe that words, said with love, would always be heard. That if your voice came from a place of patience, memory, and quiet warmth, someone would lean in. Someone would listen. That a family, no matter how distracted, would still look up when a father speaks. But now I know better. Now I know what it feels like to speak and become background noise. It always starts small. At the dinner table I try. Not every night, just the ones where I feel braver than usual. I comment on something they're discussing. Offer a story from work, a memory, a question, a thought. At first they nod. That soft, vague nod that says, I heard something, but I didn't care enough to follow it. Then someone's phone lights up. A message. A reel. A meme. And within seconds, I'm talking to the tops of heads and glowing screens. I trail off. No one notices. No one fills the silence where my words used to be. The moment just moves on without me, like I was never really there. In the car, I try again. The radio low, the ride quiet. I bring up a memory, something we shared once. I mention a song we used to sing together. I ask how their day was, how work is going, how they've been. And again, a chuckle followed by a scrolling thumb. A distracted said to the screen instead of to me. Or worse, silence. I watch their faces, blank, focused, pulled into a world I can't touch. They smile at strangers, laugh at jokes I'll never understand, react to voices that aren't mine. They give their best attention, their full selves, to people they've never met. And I sit there, fading into the passenger seat. Sometimes I want to scream, but I don't. Because I know they'll just say, "Why are you being so sensitive?" Or, "We're just tired, Dad." But I'm tired too. Tired of trying to earn the eyes of the people I once carried. Tired of feeling like every sentence I speak has to compete with the next notification. Tired of wondering if their silence is comfort or disinterest. I remember when my voice mattered. When they used to wait for me to speak. When my stories were sacred. When my laughter made them feel safe. Now when I speak, the world doesn't stop. It doesn't even pause. It just scrolls on, right past me. And I become a gentle hum in the corner of their lives. Not loud enough to hear. Not quiet enough to miss. Just a fading sound. In a home. I used to be the heart of. I wanted to believe there was still a way in. Not back into the center of their lives. I had stopped hoping for that long ago. But just a way to be near them, to be useful, to be needed even in the smallest way. So I tried again. It started with the dinner. I spent the afternoon preparing it, not out of obligation, but memory. Roast chicken, the kind my daughter used to beg for on Sundays. Mashed potatoes the way my son always liked them, thick with garlic and butter. I baked the pie from the old recipe book, the one we stained with fingerprints years ago on a rainy afternoon in the kitchen, laughing over too much cinnamon. I set the table gently. The good dishes, folded napkins, lit a small candle, not because it was fancy, but because I wanted warmth. In the room, in their eyes, in the way they might see me again. I called them to dinner. They came eventually, sat down, smiled, complimented the smell, took a few bites, and then came the words. "Oh, we actually ate out earlier, just a little, but we were starving. I might save the rest for later, Dad. Thanks, though. It's really good. I'm just not super hungry right now." They didn't mean to be cruel, but kindness without awareness can cut deeper than malice. They didn't see the hours I spent trimming, stirring, tasting, not the food, but the effort. The way I had poured pieces of myself into every corner of that meal, hoping to be more than tolerated, hoping to be felt. I cleared the plates while they returned to their screens. No one asked me to sit with them after. No one said, "Let's finish it together tomorrow." Just quiet forks, a few polite words, and the sound of footsteps back into separate rooms. The next morning I tried again. I saw a new lamp my daughter had mentioned. I bought it, wrapped it, left it outside her door with a note. Saw this and thought of you. Love, Dad. She came into the kitchen later and said, "Oh, the lamp. That was sweet. But I already ordered one. I'll return it, okay?" I nodded, smiled, said, "Of course." But inside, something slipped a little further out of reach. That evening I asked if anyone needed help with errands. A ride, groceries, advice, anything. They thanked me, like always, with that soft, careful voice people use when they don't want to be unkind, but also don't want to be interrupted. "No need, Dad, we're good. All sorted. Already planned it out." Thanks, though. Thanks, though. Two words that sound polite and feel like a wall. It wasn't the words. It was what they didn't carry. No welcome, no invitation, no room. I went back to my room that night, closed the door gently behind me, sat on the edge of the bed with my hands resting in my lap like something waiting to be called back to life. And I realized I had tried. I had tried more times than I could count. With food, with time, with laughter, with patience. But love, real love, only lives when it's received. And I was no longer being received. Not as a voice. Not as a presence. Not as a person with something still left to give. They had moved on, not with cruelty, but with comfort. They had built a rhythm that didn't need me in it. And every attempt to rejoin it only reminded me that I was no longer part of the music. That night, I lay down fully dressed. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I didn't speak. I just listened to the quiet beyond my door, the quiet that no one noticed, the quiet I'd soon take with me, because sometimes the deepest silence is not when no one answers. It's when no one even notices. You asked? There was no dramatic moment, no slammed doors, no voices raised in pain or protest. Just a quiet evening, just the familiar dim of the hallway, the television murmuring behind the living room walls, the faint laughter from a phone call I wasn't part of, and me, standing in front of the closet. The bag I pulled down was old, soft from time, its edges frayed, the same one I once used on family trips, back when we needed bigger luggage because the kids insisted on packing their favorite toys, 3 pairs of shoes, and bedtime stories. Back when they would fight over who got to sit next to me in the car, back when I was the center of the map. I unzipped it slowly as if the sound itself might wake something, and then I began. Not in a hurry, not with panic. Just a quiet rhythm, the way you fold things when you know no one is going to stop you. A sweater, socks, 2 shirts, toothbrush, wallet, nothing more than what was needed. It wasn't an escape. It was a conclusion. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room, not to check if I'd forgotten anything, but to say goodbye. The chair in the corner, the one I used to rock them to sleep in, still there, still creaking, still filled with the ghost of lullabies. The photo frame on the nightstand, me and them at the lake, all of us grinning with sunburned faces, hair wet from jumping in too early. I remember how heavy my daughter's head felt on my shoulder that day, how my son held my hand so tightly walking down the trail. I left the photo. It belonged to the house now, not to me. I opened the drawer. Inside, a small envelope. I had written the letter a few nights earlier, in the silence between their footsteps and the soft hum of appliances. I didn't know what I'd do with it when I wrote it, but now I knew. I placed it on the desk, not hidden, not framed, just there, plain and still, the way I had been. Then I stood, not with a sigh, not with a curse, just stood. I walked the hallway once more, past their closed doors, past the places where echoes used to live. Birthday songs, bedtime stories, whispered I love yous in the dark. Now those walls only carried the rustling of their lives, continuing without me. I paused at the living room entrance. They were there, both of them, faces glowing in the light of their phones, a show playing in the background. No one looked up, and I didn't expect them to. I stepped back, turned the handle slowly, closed the front door behind me with the same gentleness I once used to tuck them into bed. No drama, no sound. Because I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving the way I had lived with them these last few years, unseen, unheard, and painfully quiet. The paper was plain, no color, no special stationery, just a single page torn from a simple notepad. I had rewritten the letter 3 times, not because I was trying to be poetic, but because it's harder than you think to say goodbye without sounding bitter. In the end, I kept it honest, simple like me. I signed it with my name, not Dad, not love you, not anything that might demand affection in return. Just my name, the one they stopped saying out loud unless they needed help with something, the one that became quieter each year until it only existed on mail and prescriptions. I placed the letter on the desk in the hallway, the spot where they dropped delivery menus and unpaid bills, birthday cards they forgot to mail, flyers for things they'd never attend. I knew they'd see it eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not even tomorrow. But one day they'd walk past and something would catch their eye, and they would pause. It didn't need to scream, just whisper. I had thought about hiding it, under a pillow, in a drawer, somewhere private and soft. But no, I wanted it to be found. Not hunted, not discovered in guilt or surprise, but simply found. As naturally as they had once found my love, back when it was everywhere. The letter was not angry. There were no accusations, only memories. I reminded them of the things they'd forgotten, how I stayed up all night when they were sick, how I learned to braid hair with shaky hands and tired eyes, how I worked weekends and holidays so they could go on school trips, how I always sat in the front row, even when no one looked at me. I told them how proud I had been, still was, even as the silence grew. I told them I never wanted applause, only to be invited, not to dinner, not to vacations, but into their lives, the real ones, the messy ones, the ones where love doesn't need to be polished. And then I wrote what mattered most. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because you stopped noticing, not out of punishment, but peace. Because there comes a moment in every life where staying unseen becomes a kind of death, slow, polite, and impossible to mourn. And I was not ready to be buried while still breathing. I folded the letter once. No envelope, no formality. Just the weight of my truth resting quietly on their desk. A final offering, not to hurt, not to guilt, but to wake. I ran my hand along the edge of the page one last time. Not to change anything, but to feel it. Because some words don't live in voices. They live in rooms, in silence, in the empty spaces between footsteps where someone finally stops, sees a folded piece of paper, and realizes it was never just paper. It was presence. It was the sound of someone who had been silent too long. And as I walked out into the night, I didn't look back. Because I knew one day they would read it, and in the space between the lines, they would hear every word I never said, but always meant. The sun rose, same as always. It poured gently through the windows, warming the kitchen tile, dancing across the dust that hung unnoticed in the air. Someone opened the fridge. Someone else turned on the TV. The house stretched and yawned and came to life like it always did, without ceremony, without pause, and without me. My cup wasn't in the sink. The one I used every morning, black ceramic, chipped on the side, always sitting beside the faucet, waiting for rinsing. It wasn't there, but no one noticed. Not at breakfast. Not when someone passed by my door and didn't see it cracked open the way it usually was. Not when no one heard the shuffle of slippers along the hallway, or the gentle closing of the medicine cabinet I always opened second, after brushing my teeth. Not even when my chair at the kitchen table remained empty. It took until evening, until the day had gone stale and the light began to sink into the carpet, and the house grew quieter again, the kind of quiet that no longer felt casual, but empty. Then someone finally said it. "Has anyone seen him today?" A pause. "I think he's just in his room," another voice offered. A shrug, an absent casual guess. But then came the hesitation, the second glance toward the hallway, the moment of doubt that begins to stretch longer than it should. Someone walked down the corridor, maybe out of habit, maybe out of a tug they couldn't quite explain. The door was closed, fully closed. That was the first sign, because I never closed it all the way. I always left it slightly ajar, like a gentle invitation, a way of saying, "I'm here. You can come in if you ever feel like remembering I exist." They knocked. No answer. Another knock. Still nothing. They opened the door slowly, and for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, they looked. Really looked? The bed was made, too neatly, the blanket smoothed with care, the pillow propped just right, as if in apology for the years it sat waiting for someone to sit beside it. The nightstand was empty. The photo frame, the one with their sunburned smiles, was gone. The closet hung open like a mouth halfway to a sentence no one wanted to finish. And then they noticed the desk, the paper, the folded letter, but they didn't touch it, not yet, because there was something sacred in the stillness, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before, a silence that felt different now, not like absence, but like the echo of something they had refused to hear. They looked around again. No suitcase, no shoes by the door, no coat on the hook. Then came the slow realization. He wasn't busy. He wasn't in his room. He wasn't asleep or working late or taking a walk. He was gone, and he hadn't left a hole. He had left a shape, one they had grown so used to stepping around that they never noticed it was the only thing keeping the room from falling inward. They called out softly at first, then louder, but only the walls answered. For the first time, the house didn't feel full. It felt like a question with a door left open, a letter on a desk, and the sound of a man who had loved them so silently that they only noticed his voice. Once it was gone. At first, it was just mild confusion. A few messages sent without reply. A couple of unanswered calls. A shared glance across the kitchen when they realized no one had heard his footsteps all day. Still, they didn't take it seriously. He's probably just out. Maybe he left his phone. He does that. Disappears for a bit. They said it like it was normal. Like his silence had become so routine it didn't deserve urgency. Like absence was just another of his quirks. Not a cry gone unheard. But hours passed. The sun dipped lower. The air in the house thickened. And then something shifted. A second round of calls, this time to both phones. His cell. The old one they had teased him for never upgrading. Then the landline in his room. The one that usually rang out with a stubborn, solid ring from a time when phones still had cords, and waiting meant something. Both silent. Then came the walking. Down the hallway. Faster this time. More footsteps. Heavier. They opened the door to his room again. This time not with curiosity, but with a growing ache. And that's when it hit them. Not because of what they saw, but because of what they didn't. The jacket missing from its hook. The watch no longer on the dresser. The drawer half open, lighter than before. The scent of his aftershave, faint, already fading, like a parting gesture. Panic doesn't arrive all at once. It starts with confusion, then resistance, then a cold realization that builds from the stomach to the throat, like rising water. In a locked room. They checked the garage. The car wasn't there. Someone said his wallet was missing too. Another pointed out that the calendar in his room had a tiny mark beside yesterday's date. A dot, nothing more. But it felt like a signature now. They began speaking louder, then calling his name. Down the street, into voicemail. They opened the back gate, checked every light, looked in every room as if he might still be curled somewhere, just quiet, just waiting. But he wasn't. And that's when they noticed the letter, the one they had seen but hadn't dared to touch. This time they read it, and with each line, each gentle, unblaming word, the panic changed, it softened, it cracked, and then it broke. Not because they had lost him, but because he had been leaving long before he ever walked out that door. And none of them had noticed until now. They gathered in his room the way people gather at a wake, quiet, hesitant, unsure what they're allowed to feel. The door stayed open now, as if keeping it shut would somehow trap the truth inside. The room was untouched, but everything felt different. The air itself carried weight. The letter sat on the desk like it had been waiting. It wasn't dramatic. No big red envelope, no read me in bold ink. Just a single sheet of paper folded neatly, his handwriting steady and plain, like him. They looked at it as though it might change if they stared long enough. Become lighter, become easier, become something other than what they knew it had to be. A mirror. His daughter was the first to reach for it. She held it carefully, as if afraid it might fall apart in her hands. She unfolded it slowly, and as the first lines met her eyes, her fingers gripped the edge tighter. She read aloud, softly. I'm not leaving because I don't love you. I'm leaving because somewhere along the way I became a ghost in my own home. Her voice caught on the word ghost. You didn't mean to. I know that. Life got busy. You got older. I became the background to your days. The chair that always stays where it is. The hallway light you forget you left on. I was there, always, but you stopped seeing me. She stopped reading. Silence. Thick, tangible. Her brother reached out, gently taking the page. His hands shook. I remember when you used to ask me everything. How to tie your shoes. What stars were made of, if monsters were real. I always answered, not because I knew everything, but because you asked. And when the question stopped, I waited. I'm still waiting. He blinked, swallowed hard. His throat moved, but no sound came out. He held the paper out to their mother, unable to go on. She hesitated, then took it. The silence in the room now had gravity. Not just stillness, but pull. As if every word on that page was dragging them down into memory. I didn't want fanfare. I never needed applause. I only ever wanted to be chosen, not out of habit, but out of love. To be looked for, not found by accident. She paused. I remember each of you as children. The first time you fell asleep in my arms. The first time you called me Daddy. The first time you made me feel like I was enough, not just by needing me. I've never stopped being that man. I just think maybe you stopped needing him. Her voice broke. She folded the letter slowly, pressed it to her chest. No one spoke. Not because they didn't have words, but because none of their words could match his silence. This wasn't a farewell laced with blame. It wasn't an accusation. It was a remembrance of every small thing he gave without asking, of every moment he made their lives easier, lighter, better, by taking the weight into his own hands. It was a love letter written by a man who realized love should not only be given, but received. And now, for the first time in years, they finally heard him, and it hurt in all the places where love had once gone unnoticed. His silence did not leave with him. It stayed. It moved through the house like air thick with something sacred and broken, like a presence too large to name. The house had never felt this loud in its quiet, not even when he lost his wife, not even in the early days of grief. This silence was different, because now it had a voice, a memory, a letter, and they could no longer pretend they didn't hear it. Every room whispered him. In the hallway, the lights still flicked on at the angle of his passing. In the kitchen, his chair sat perfectly pushed in, not because he was neat, but because no one had pulled it out since. In the bathroom, the towel he used still hung untouched. Someone moved to replace it once, but couldn't. His absence had shape now, the shape of routine, of footsteps that didn't come, of a teacup that never made it to the sink. They didn't talk about it at first. Each of them wandered through the house like shadows retracing steps that no longer led to him. His daughter tried to keep busy. She cleaned the counter where he used to leave the mail, found a bill he'd paid early. She smiled through tears. He always paid things early. Better ahead than sorry, he used to say. His son began waking earlier. He'd brew coffee and pour 2 mugs without thinking, then realize, with breath caught in his chest, that only one was needed now. And the mother, she who once shared a bed with him, then years later shared only space, began opening his door more often, not to look for him, but to sit, to let the silence press against her like a confession. She whispered things to the room when no one was listening. I should have told you we still needed you. I should have asked more. I should have noticed. The letter lived in the center of the table now, unfolded, worn like scripture. They didn't hide it, didn't put it away. It sat there as reminder, as apology, as wound, because what hurt most wasn't that he left. It was the knowledge that they had been living without him long before he did. Each later, they told him, now sounded like never. Each "we're good, Dad" echoed with a new hollowness, because now they understood what he meant when he said he became a ghost. He had been fading before their eyes, and they'd called it peace, independence, respect. But really, it was neglect, wrapped in politeness, justified by distraction. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was filled with everything they hadn't said, with every time they chose convenience over connection, every time they looked at their phones instead of his face, every time they told themselves he knows we love him, but forgot love needs to be seen. Now they saw it, everywhere, in his favorite mug, untouched, in the way the floor creaked near his room, and no one answered it. In the calendar, his birthday circled in ink he thought might remind them. It hadn't. Now it did. They hadn't just lost a father, a husband, a presence. They had lost a chance. And in that loss, the house mourned, not just him, but the thousand little ways they had once been held by a man who asked for nothing but to be noticed. He came back on a Tuesday. No storm, no music swelling, no announcement. Just the soft sound of gravel under tires. A door clicking shut. A man walking up familiar steps with an unfamiliar quiet in his heart. Not a hero's return. Not a prodigal one. Just a man coming home. If it was still home. He didn't come for drama. He didn't come to be begged. He didn't even come to be forgiven. He came because something inside him had softened. Not the wound, but the will. Because despite everything, despite being made invisible in the one place where he once mattered most, he still loved them. And because home, he now understood, isn't a structure or a set of rooms. It's the place where you choose to offer your heart, even if it's been bruised, even if you're not sure it will be held gently. He stood at the front door for a while, not knocking, not turning the handle, just standing. It had been weeks, weeks where no one knew where he went, but everyone felt where he wasn't. He knew they'd read the letter. He imagined the silence after it, imagined their faces, imagined if it finally broke through. But now he wasn't imagining. He was here. When he finally opened the door, he half expected something theatrical. Gasps, tears, apologies. Instead, what greeted him was something quieter. Stillness. And then motion. His daughter stood first. She was barefoot, holding a dish towel, eyes wide and brimming with everything she hadn't been able to say, not because she didn't want to, but because she hadn't known how. His son was on the stairs. He stopped mid-step, as if frozen in the act of retrieving something unimportant. He looked down at his father, not like a child seeing a parent, but like a man seeing his own mistakes in human form. No one said his name, not yet. It was his wife, the one who'd long since stopped calling herself that out loud, who stepped forward. She didn't reach for him. She didn't touch him. But her voice, raw and almost breaking, carried more than touch could have. "You came back." He nodded. Nothing more. She stepped aside, just an inch, just enough. An invitation, not to a house, to belonging. And that was all he needed. He walked in, slowly, every step brushing the edges of memory. He saw the picture frame had changed. A new photo of them, taken long ago, now placed beside one from the wedding he missed because they forgot to tell him. A plate sat out for him at the table, not by plan, by hope. No one asked, "Where were you?" No one demanded explanation. They all knew the answer. They had read it in the silence. They had tasted it in every cold morning without his teacup in the sink. They had carried it in the ache of unspoken shame. He sat down, not like a guest, not like a stranger, but like a man who had once been erased and was now choosing to write himself back in. He didn't need their tears. He didn't need their words. He didn't even need their promises. He needed only this, to be seen, to be known again, not by obligation, but by choice. Because the deepest kind of love isn't loud. It doesn't shout through rooms or make demands. It waits at the door, again and again, and only asks, "Will you choose me this time?" And this time, as he sat in his chair, as his daughter reached for his hand, as his son sat across from him and did not look away, he didn't have to ask. He already knew. This time, they would. The next morning he woke before the sun. Old habit. Some rhythms outlive the reasons they were born for. He moved through the quiet house, barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. The floor creaked like it used to, but now it felt like a welcome, not a warning. The kitchen smelled of something warm, not food, memory. His mug, the chipped black one, sat clean on the counter. Beside it, a note written in his daughter's handwriting, still slightly crooked, from when she used to hand him drawings of stick figures, with too many fingers and hearts too big to fit on the page. It wasn't in an envelope. It didn't need to be. Just a scrap of paper torn from the family grocery list, stuck gently to the kitchen whiteboard, the place where they once wrote appointments and reminders and things they never looked at twice. But this he read more than once. "Don't leave again, Dad. We finally learned how to listen." No flourish, no grand apology, just truth. He stood there, unmoving, eyes tracing every letter like they might disappear if he blinked. In the silence that followed, he remembered all the times he'd walked into this kitchen unnoticed, when his presence had been just another part of the furniture. He remembered pouring cereal while they scrolled their phones. He remembered setting the table while they laughed at something else, someone else. He remembered not being needed. And now the words on the board didn't just ask him to stay. They saw him, fully, finally, not because he had made them listen, but because he had stopped speaking, because his absence had said what his presence never could. There was something unshakably holy in that realization, that sometimes, to be truly heard, you have to go silent, that sometimes, to matter, you have to disappear, but more than that, to come back, you have to be willing to forgive. He turned to the table. Someone had left breakfast warming under foil. 2 plates, not one. No guessing who the other was for. And in the center of it all, next to the fruit bowl, was a small photo. Him, holding both children on his lap, a birthday cake in front of them, lopsided candles. His smile crooked, his eyes full. He sat down slowly, not like a man testing the ground, but like someone returning to the rhythm of a life that had at last made space for him. He poured his tea, took a breath, and in that breath was something more powerful than reconciliation. It was belonging, not assumed, not forced, chosen. Behind him, soft footsteps padded down the hallway. A sleepy voice, "Morning, Dad." No hesitation, no guilt, just the ordinary beauty of being wanted again. And in that moment, he understood. The letter hadn't been a good